cameras, and we welcome everyone to another Sunday night edition, Monday, Tuesday, whenever you guys are getting a chance to watch it. Thank you for tuning in to Accessibly Live, the book club reading room. I am Joel K. Hope everyone's has had a wonderful week, great weekend, and is having a good week wherever you guys are watching. I appreciate everybody who's been tuning in. This is the show where we read public domain books, short stories, poetry, lots of other fun things here on the channel. A couple weeks ago, we did our first ever public domain movie, and I'm really happy that you guys enjoyed it because coming up for the holidays this year, I've got another one. This one might make you laugh. Maybe a little more zany than what we had on Halloween, but it might make you roll your eyes too. That announcement's coming up in a couple weeks. Tonight, we've got something a little bit different. As you saw in the title cards today, we've got a short story, a science fiction short story by Andrew North. All Cats Are Gray. This is a nice little departure after the last 2 weeks, of me really giving you guys something that it was different. It was different. I admit it freely. I took it as a little bit of a challenge to read Hesiod's Theogony. Because I always wanted to. Well, I've read it before, but to read it live and to do something really different from some of the things that I've read here on the show over almost 2 years now. That's right. End of January will be 2-year anniversary for the show. And as we do every year for anniversary, we start something kind of fun. We do the Hardy Boys here on the show. And we will be starting that, as I said, towards the end of January. And we'll let you know what title that is when it comes up. Like I said, it was a fun time last 2 weeks, and you guys saw me fumble big time over the Greek gods' names and the plethora of Greek gods' names that we had. So tonight, something a little bit different, a lot a bit different, and like I said, I'm grateful and I'm thank you guys for tuning in, watching, and as with everything, like any content provider and creator here, we ask you just to like and subscribe to the channel. You guys note that I don't do Patreon. I don't do anything like that. I do this for fun. I am doing this just to have a little bit of fun and take my English major degree and being someone who likes my books and likes reading and gives it back to you. And that's what we're doing here. I mean, this is the show where you guys just kick back, relax, crank down the lights if you want, and just enjoy the book. This is a short story that's been around since 1960s. And Andrew North was a man who just created some very simple short stories and some fun short stories. This is one of them. Tonight, we are going to read All Cats Are Gray by Andrew North. Here on Accessibly Live, the book club reading room. Let's get started. There is a preface to this story, by the way. An odd story made up of oddly assorted elements that include a man, a woman, a black cat, a treasure, and an invisible being that has to be seen to be believed. Think about that one. But this is All Cats Are Gray by Andrew North. Under normal conditions, a whole person has a decided advantage over a handicapped one. But Out in deep space, the normal may be reversed. For humans, at any rate. Stina of the Spaceways. That sounds just like a corny title for one of those stellar video spreads. I ought to know. I've tried my hand at writing enough of them. Only this Stina was no glamour babe. She was as colorless as a lunar planet. Even the hair netted down to her skull had a sort of grayish cast, and I never saw her but once draped in anything but a shapeless, baggy gray space all. Stina was strictly background stuff, and that is where she spent mostly her free hours, in a smelly, smoky background corners of any stellar port dive frequented by space free spacers. If you really wanted to look for her, you could spot her, just sitting there listening to the talk, listening and remembering. She didn't open her own mouth often, but when she did, spacers had to listen. And the lucky few who heard her rare spoken words, these will never forget Stina. She drifted from port to port. Being an expert operator on the big calculators, she found jobs wherever she cared to stay for a time. And she came to be something like a masterminded machine she tended, smooth, gray, without much personality of her own. But it was Stina who told Bub Nelson about the Jovian moon rights, and her warnings saved Bud's life 6 months later. It was Stina who identified a piece of stone Keen Clark was passing around the table one night, rightly called it unworked stillite. That started a rush which made 10 fortunes overnight for men who were down to their last jets. And, last of all, she made a crack. She cracked the case of the Empress of Mars. All the boys who had profited by her odd store of knowledge and her photographic memory tried at one time or another to balance the scales. But she wouldn't take so much as a cup of canal water at her expense, let alone the credits they tried to push on her. Bob Nelson was the only one who got around her refusal. It was he who brought her Bat. About a year after the Jovian affair, he walked into the free fall one night and dumped Bat down on her table. Bat looked at Steen and growled. She looked calmly back at him and nodded once. From then on, they traveled together, the thin gray woman and the big gray tomcat. Bat learned to know the inside of more stellar bars than even most spacers visited in a lifetime. He developed a liking for vanilla juice, drank it neat, quick, right out of the glass. And he was always at home on any table where Steen elected to drop him. This was really the story of Steen, Bat, Cliff Morin, and the Empress of Mars, a story which is already legend of the spaceways. And it's a damn good story, too. I ought to know, having framed the first version of it myself. For I was there, right in Rigel Royal, when it all began on the night that Cliff Morin blew in, looking lower than an Ant-Man's belly and twice as nasty. He had a spell of luck foul enough to twist a man into a slug snake, and we all knew that there was an attachment out for his ship. Cliff had fought his way up from the back courts of Venaport. Lose his ship, he'd slip back there to rot. He was at the snarling stage at night when he picked out a table for himself and set out to drink away his troubles. However, just as the first bottle arrived, so did a visitor. Stina came out of the corner, Bat curled around her shoulder, stole-wise, his favorite mode of travel. She crossed over and dropped down without invitation at Cliff's side. That shook him out of his sulks, because Stina never chose company when she could be alone. If one of the manstones on Ganymede had come thumping in, it wouldn't have made us look out the corners of our eyes. She stretched out one long finger hand and set aside the bottle he had ordered and said only one thing. It's about time for the Empress of Mars to appear again. Cliff scowled and bit his lip. He was tough as jet lining, and you have to be granted inside and out to struggle up the Venaport to command a ship. But we could guess that was running through his mind at the moment. The Empress of Mars was just about the biggest prize a spacer could aim for. But in 50 years, she had been following her odd, queer, derelict orbit through space. Many men had tried to bring her in, and none had succeeded. A pleasure ship carrying untold wealth, she had been mysteriously abandoned in space by the passengers and crew, none of whom had ever been seen or heard of again. At intervals thereafter, she had been sighted, even boarded. Those who ventured into her either vanished or returned swiftly without any believable explanation of what they had seen, wanting only to get away from her as quickly as possible. But the man who could bring her in, or even strip her clean in space, that man would win the jackpot. All right, Cliff slammed his fist down on the table. I'll try even that. Stina looked at him, much as she might have looked at Bat at the day Bub Nelson brought him at her, and nodded. That was all I saw. The rest of the story came to me in pieces months later, and in another port half the system away. Cliff took off that night. He was afraid to risk waiting without a writ that could pull the ship out from under him. And it wasn't until he was in space he had discovered his passengers, Stina and Bat. We'll never know what happened then. I'm betting that Stina made no explanation at all. She wouldn't. It was the first time she had decided to crash in on her own tip, and she was there. That was all. Maybe that point weighed on Cliff. Maybe he just didn't care. Anyway, the three were together when they sighted the Empress riding, her deadlights gleaming, a ghost ship in night space. She must have been an eerie sight because her other lights were on too, in addition to the red warnings on her nose. She seemed alive, a Flying Dutchman of space. Cliff worked his ship skillfully alongside and had no trouble docking in the snapping magnetic lines to her lock. Some minutes later, the three of them passed into her. There was still air in her cabins and the corridors, air that bore a faint corrupt taint which sent Bat to sniffing greedily and could be picked up by even the less sensitive human nostrils. Cliff headed straight for the cabin control, but Stina and Bat went prowling. Closed doors were a challenge to both of them, and Stina opened each as she passed, taking a quick look at what lay within. A fifth door opened on a room with no woman could leave without further investigation. I don't know what had been housed there when Empress left port on her last lengthy cruise. Anyone really curious can check back on the old photo reg cards, but there was a lavish display of silks trailing out of two travel kits on the floor. A dressing table crowded with crystal and jeweled containers, along with other lures for the female which drew Stina in. She was standing in front of a dressing table when she glanced into it, and froze. Over her right shoulder, she could see the spider silk cover on the bed. Right in the middle of the sheet, gossamer expanse, was a sparkling heap of gems, the dumped contents of some jewel case. Bat had jumped to the foot of the bed, and flattened out as cats will, watching those gems, watching them, and something else. Stina put out her hand blindly and caught up the nearest bottle. As she unstopped it, she watched the mirrored bed. A gemmed bracelet rose from the pile, rose in the air, tinkled its siren song. It was as if an idle hand played. Bat spat almost noisily, but he did not retreat. Bat had yet not decided his course. She put down the bottle. Then she did something which perhaps few the men she had listened to through the years could ever have done. She moved without hurry or sign of disturbance on a tour about the room, and although she approached the bed, she did not touch the jewels. She could not force herself to do that. It took her 5 minutes to play out her innocence and unconcern. Then it was Bat who decided the issue. He leapt from the bed and escorted something to the door, remaining a careful distance behind. Then he mewed loudly twice. Stina followed him and opened the door wider. Bat went straight down the corridor, as intent as a hound on the warmest of scents. Stina rolled behind him, holding her pace to the unhurried gait of an explorer. What sped before them both was invisible to her, but Bat never baffled by it. They must have gone into the control cabin almost on the heels of the unseen, if the unseen had heels, for Bat crouched just within the doorway and refused to move on. Stina looked down at the length of the instrument panels and the officers' station seats to where Cliff Morin worked. On the heavy carpet, her boots made no sound, and he did not glance up, but sat humming through his teeth as he tested the tardy and reluctant responses to the buttons which he had not pushed in years. To human eyes, they were alone in the cabin. But Bat still followed a moving something with his gaze. And it was something which he had at last made up his mind to distrust and dislike. For now, he took a step or two forward and spat, his loathing made plain by every raised hair on his spine. And in that same moment, Stina saw a flicker of vague outline against Cliff's hunched shoulders, as if the invisible one had crossed the space between them. But why had it been revealed against Cliff's and not against the back of the seats, or against the panels, the walls of the corridor, or the cover of the bed where it had reclined and played with its lute? What could Bat see? A storehouse memory that had served Stina so well the years clicked open a half-forgotten door. When one swift motion she tore loose her spaceall and flung the baggy garment across the back of the nearest seat. Bat was snarling now, emitting a throaty rising cry that was his hunting song. But it was edging back towards Stina's feet, shrinking from something that he could not fight, but which he faced defiantly. If he could draw it after him, past that dangling spaceall, he had to. It was their only chance. What the? Cliff had come out of his seat and was staring at them. What he saw must have been weird enough. Stina, bare-armed and shouldered, her usually stiff netted hair falling wildly down her back. Stina watching empty space with narrow eyes and set mouth, calculating a single wild chance. Bat, crouched on his belly, retreating the thin air step by step, and wailing like a demon. "Toss me your blaster," Stina gave the order calmly, as if they sat at the table in Rigel Royal. And as quietly Cliff obeyed. She caught the small weapon out of the air with a steady hand, caught it, and leveled it. Stay just where you are, she warned. Back, Bat. Bring it back. With that last throat-splitting screech of rage and hate, Bat twisted to safety between her boots. She pressed her with her thumb and forefinger, firing at the wall space alls. The material turned to a powdery flakes of ash, except for certain bits which still flapped from the scorched seat, as if something had protected them from the force of the blast. Bat sprang straight up in the air and screamed that tore its ears. What? Began Cliff again. Stina made a warning motion with her left hand. Wait. She was still tense, still watching Bat. The cat dashed madly around the cabin twice, running crazily with white ringed eyes and flecks of foam on its muzzle. Then he stopped abruptly at the doorway. Stopped and looked back over his shoulder for a long, silent moment. He sniffed delicately. Stina and Cliff could smell it now, too. A thick, oily stench which was not the usual odor left by an exploding blaster shell. Bat came back, treading daintily across the carpet, almost on tips of its paws. He raised his head as he passed Stina, and then he went confidently back to sniff, and spit twice at the unburned strips of the space alls. Having thus paid his respects to the late enemy, he sat down calmly and set to washing his fur with deliberation. Stina sighed once and dropped into the navigator's seat. Maybe now you'll tell me what the hell's happened, Cliff exploded as he took the blaster out of her hand. Gray, she said, dazed. It must have been gray. Or it must have seemed like that. I'm colorblind, you see. I can only see shades of gray. My whole world is gray, like Bat's. His world is gray too, all gray. But he's been compensated for he can see above and below our range of color vibrations, and apparently so can I. Her voice wavered, and she raised her chin with a new air Cliff had never seen before. A sort of proud acceptance. She pushed back a wandering hair, but she made no move to imprison it under the heavy net again. That's why I saw the thing when it crossed between us, against your space all, and was another shade of gray, an outline. So I put it out of my mind and waited for it to show again that it was our only chance, Cliff. It was curious at first, I think, and it knew we couldn't see it, which is why it waited to attack. But when Bat's actions gave it away, it moved. So I waited to see the flicker against the space alls, and then I let him have it. It's really very simple. Cliff laughed a bit shakily. But what was that gray thing? I don't get it. I think it was what made the Empress a derelict. Something out of space, maybe, or from another world somewhere. She waved her hands. It's invisible because it's a color beyond our range of sight. It must have stayed in here all those years, and it kills. It must, when its curiosity is satisfied. Swiftly, she described the scene in the cabin and the strange behavior of the gem pile which had betrayed her creature to her. Cliff did not return his blaster to his holder. Any more of them on board, you think? He didn't look pleased at the prospect. Stina turned to Bat. He was paying particular attention to the space between two front toes in the process of complete bath. I don't think so. But Bat will tell us if they are. He can see them clearly. I believe. But there weren't any more, and 2 weeks later, Cliff, Stina, and Bat brought the Empress into lunar quarantine station. And at the end of Stina's story, because we all have been told happy marriages need no chronicles, and Stina had found someone who knew of her gray world and did not find it too hard to share with her, someone besides Bat. And it turned out to be a real love match. The last time I saw her was wrapped in a flame red cloak from the looms of Rigel, and wore a fortune in Jovian rubies blazing on her wrists. Cliff was flipping a three-figure credit bill to a waiter, and Bat had a row of Vernal juice glasses set up before him. Just a little family party out on the town. All Cats Are Gray by Andrew North. Hope you guys enjoyed that. Like I said, this was going to be a little shorter episode than what we have been doing for the past few months. Something fun. I've been finding a few short stories that I'm going to continue on for the next few weeks. Some fun, different things for everybody. Next week, we have another short story by the legendary Ray Bradbury. The story, a simple short story, one of Ray Bradbury's finest, 0 Hour. That will be next week on the show. As I've said, I appreciate you guys watching. I really do. Please remember, when you get a chance, like and subscribe. I really appreciate everybody who stops in, says hello. I've had a few emails that people have sent, and I appreciate it. I really, really do. We, as I said, this is going to be a shorter show. Something, a nice surprise for everybody. I appreciate everybody who's been watching here on Twitch, everybody who's been watching here on YouTube as well. You're always, always appreciated. Thank you. I am Joel K, and normally we have a final quote for the night. But with all the craziness that's been going on the last few weeks, and for my love of books, and for those who are fighting against people banning books and burning books, I have a little bit of humor for you, I found, and I had a good laugh. Hope you do too. The library rejected your request to ban all books on cats and squirrels. But to be fair, it was no dumber than all the other book bans requests we get. Which is probably very, very true. This is the email. Give me a yell. Let me know where you guys are watching from. If you guys know some short stories, some public domain short stories, let me know. I would love to put them on, and we can add them to the growing list. I've had people sending me requests. I am Joel K. This is my email. Give me a yell. Let me know how you guys are doing. I appreciate everybody who stops in. It's time to wrap up a short story edition of Accessibly Live, the book club reading room. Be well, be safe, be kind. It's been a wild couple weeks. Keep looking out for friends and family. With the seasons changing, weather changing, you never know what we're going to get. To those in the southern U.S., keep rebuilding and keeping your heads up from all the hurricanes you guys have been hit with. For all my friends out there, thank you. I am Joel K. We will see you all next Sunday for Ray Bradbury's 0 Hour here on Accessibly Live, the book club reading room. Take care, you guys. Bye-bye.